Hi, my name is Bethany, and I'm going to share with you a little bit about a missionary to China named Gladys Aylward. Gladys was born in 1902 to a poor but devout family in London, England. While she was in Sunday school, a missionary to China visited their class and told them that there were millions of people all around the world who had never heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. This moved Gladys, and as the missionary continued to explain that God had actually called his church and his people to go into all nations and make disciples, she knew in that moment that she was meant to go to China, and the Lord was calling her there to serve the Chinese people and to make disciples. When she was 26, she applied to the Inland Chinese Mission Board to be a missionary to China. They rejected her application. They said that she wasn't educated enough, she wasn't smart enough, she wouldn't learn the language, and she was too old, and that it was best if she wasn't a missionary. Most people would see that kind of rejection and think, well, I'm not capable, I'm not good enough to do this. But Gladys knew that God delighted in using the weak to shame the strong, and that in her own weaknesses, he would be strong. And so because of that, and because of her passion to see his name be made great in China, she worked as a maid and saved up money for a one-way train ticket to mainland China. When she arrived, she met up with an elderly missionary woman who was a widow named Mrs. Lawson, and she assisted her in her work. Mrs. Lawson worked in Yanqing, which is a city that had a lot of caravans and mule drivers come through it because it was a trade city. And Mrs. Lawson had an inn where mule drivers would come through, and then at night, she and Gladys, eventually when she began to master the language, would share with them Bible stories and the good news about Jesus. Shortly after Gladys arrived, Mrs. Lawson passed away, and Gladys was called to the Mandarin's palace. The Mandarin was the magistrate and ruler in the area. And he called Gladys in and asked her what she was doing there because she was the only foreigner now in the city. She explained her heart for the Chinese people. She explained God's heart for the Chinese people and the gospel. And the Mandarin was dismissive of her message. But he said that he had a position for her in the government, that they needed someone to make sure that the law outlawing foot binding was being enforced in the rural mountain villages. And he offered her the job. Gladys accepted this job on one condition. She told him that wherever she went, she was going to share this good news about Jesus, and that if he wasn't okay with that, she wouldn't take the job. The Mandarin didn't care as long as his work got done. He was happy with it, so he told her, no, that's fine. Tell people about Jesus, I don't care. Just make sure they stop binding the girls' feet. So Gladys went all throughout these villages, helping to end foot binding, but sharing the gospel in each one. And throughout these villages, men and women came to know Jesus, and churches began to grow in villages that had never heard the gospel before. When Gladys wasn't going throughout the mountain villages, she was in Yanqing, and she worked to help reform the prison system. She took in over 100 orphans who had been displaced because of a war between Japan and China. She nursed the sick, and she adopted several children for herself. As the Chinese continued to fight with the Japanese, and the Japanese got closer and closer to the city of Yanqing, the Mandarin knew that his court would need to evacuate, so he held a lavish feast and invited Gladys to come. In the middle of the feast, the Mandarin announced that he wanted to say something about Gladys, who they had named the Virtuous One in Chinese because of all of her work in the city. And he stood up and he said this: "From the other side of the world, the Virtuous One journeyed to China, owing allegiance only to her living God. She brought her Christianity to Yanqing. She did not sit hidden in a temple contemplating how virtuous she was. She unbound the feet of infants. She helped the poor. She visited the jails. She took orphans under her roof. She nursed the wounded." And after saying this in front of his whole court, he confessed that he now too believed in this living God of Gladys's, and that he wanted to come to know Jesus as his own Lord and as his own Savior. Shortly after this, he moved his court to another city, and Gladys took over 100 orphans across the mountains to safety. Later on, the communist government would exile her from China, and she would move to Taiwan and continue her work of evangelism and work with orphan children. Gladys wasn't particularly impressive in her education. She had to drop out of school at 14. Gladys wasn't particularly impressive in her physical appearance. She was 4'10". Gladys wasn't particularly smart. Gladys wasn't particularly well-read. She wasn't from a family of affluence or power or wealth. But her drive, her zeal, her ability, her success came from one belief: that God was to be obeyed at all cost, and that it was His greatness, not her greatness, that would enable her to do His work. She believed that God really did have people for Himself in every tribe, tongue, and nation. She believed that she must be faithful to His call above all things. And she believed that in her weakness, He was strong. And that so encourages me in my walk, and it so encourages me in thinking about sharing the gospel and thinking about ministry and missions. I hope it encourages you too, that we serve a God who is powerful in spite of our weakness, and who will be glorified in every tribe, in every tongue, and in every nation on this earth. For more information about Gladys Aylward, I've posted some links below of biographies and videos. I hope her story has encouraged you as much as it's encouraged me.